September 2009, 3 months after the world buried Michael Jackson, a moment occurred behind closed doors that almost no one was supposed to know about. It didn't happen on a stage. It didn't involve cameras, fans, or headlines. It happened in silence, inside a private mausoleum, with only a handful of people present. Michael Jackson's daughter, Paris Jackson, was only 11 years old. She had already lived through something no child should ever experience: the sudden death of a parent the entire world loved, analyzed, and argued about. But what happened that day would change her understanding of her father forever. Against protocol, against advice, against the wishes of almost everyone around her, Paris asked to see him. Not a photo, not a memory, not a video. She asked to see her father's coffin. What happened next stunned everyone present. As the coffin was opened briefly, just long enough for a final goodbye, something unexpected happened. A small folded note slipped out and fell to the floor. No one knew it was there. No one knew what it said. And when they read it, the room fell into absolute silence. Because the message inside wasn't meant for the public. It wasn't meant for lawyers. It wasn't meant for the world. It was meant for her. What was written on that note? Why had Michael hidden it there? And how did it change the way Paris saw her father? And is death forever? Stay with this story. Because this is not about conspiracy or spectacle. This is about grief, love, and the final private act of a man whose entire life was lived in public. The Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, was quiet in the early morning hours. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, not peaceful but restrained, as if sound itself understood it was not welcome there. Michael Jackson had been laid to rest weeks earlier in the Grand Mausoleum, in a private chamber sealed from the public, guarded by security and bound by strict rules. For most people, that would have been the end. For Paris Jackson, it wasn't. At 11 years old, Paris was grieving in a way no adult around her fully understood. The world assumed she had already said goodbye. At the memorial, at the funeral, through tears broadcast across global television. But for Paris, none of that felt real. She hadn't seen her father. Not truly. She had seen crowds, cameras, flowers, headlines, but she had not seen him. In the days after the funeral, Paris became quieter, not withdrawn in a dramatic way, but observant, internal, as if she were listening for something only she could hear. She asked fewer questions at first. Then, one evening, she asked one that stopped everyone in the room cold. "Can I see my dad?" The adults exchanged glances. Her grandmother, Catherine Jackson, froze. The guardians and advisors present immediately tried to redirect the conversation. "You've already said goodbye, sweetheart," someone said gently. "He's at peace now," another added. "That wouldn't be good for you," came a firmer voice. Paris didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "I haven't." They assumed it was a child's misunderstanding, grief trying to find form. But Paris was precise in her words. "I want to see him. Just once. I need to know he's really there." The request unsettled everyone, not because it was unreasonable, but because it broke every rule that had been put in place since Michael's death. The mausoleum was sealed. The coffin was not to be opened again. Privacy, dignity, and legal protocols were clear, but Paris didn't understand protocols. She understood loss. Over the next several days, she repeated the request. Calmly, consistently. She didn't demand. She didn't plead. She simply stated it as something she needed, the way a child asks for water when they're thirsty. Catherine Jackson struggled deeply with the decision. She knew Michael better than anyone in that family. She also knew Paris was not like other children. Paris had inherited her father's sensitivity, his emotional intensity, his need for closure, his inability to accept half-truths. Micah himself had always insisted that his children be allowed to feel things fully. Finally, after consultations with family, legal representatives, and the cemetery administration, a compromise was reached. There would be a brief, private moment. No media, no photographs, no extended viewing. Just Paris, her grandmother, and 2 cemetery officials. The morning was chosen carefully. Early, quiet, discreet. As they walked through the mausoleum corridors, Paris held Catherine's hand tightly. The space smelled faintly of stone and flowers. Her footsteps echoed softly, each sound amplifying the weight of where they were. Paris didn't cry. Not yet. When they reached the chamber, one of the officials explained gently what would happen. The coffin would be opened slightly. Just enough. Only for a moment. Paris nodded. "I just want to say goodbye," she said. The adults assumed that would be all. They were wrong. As the coffin lid was carefully opened, the air in the room seemed to shift. Paris took a step forward, her breathing shallow. She stared at her father, the man the world knew as an icon, but she knew as someone who braided her hair, told her stories, and whispered, "I love you," before bed. Her lips trembled, but then something happened that no one anticipated. As the lid moved, a small folded piece of paper, tucked carefully but not secured, slid free. It fluttered down and landed on the marble floor. Everyone froze. The sound was barely audible, but in that room it felt deafening. Paris looked down. "What's that?" she asked. No one answered. One of the officials bent down and picked it up. The paper was old, creased, and folded more than once. Clearly something placed intentionally, not accidentally. Catherine's heart began to race. Paris reached out. "Can I see it?" The official hesitated, then handed it to Catherine. Catherine unfolded the note slowly, and as she read the first line, her face drained of color, because the handwriting was unmistakable. It was Michael's, and it wasn't a will. It wasn't instructions. It wasn't meant for lawyers or history. It began with only 4 words. "For my little girl." And in that moment, everyone in the room realized something chilling and profound. Michael Jackson had known. He had known there would come a moment when one of his children would need more than explanations. He had prepared for it. And what he left behind was about to change everything Paris believed about her father, and about the way he chose to say goodbye. The room did not move. No one spoke. The folded paper sat in Catherine Jackson's trembling hands, its edges worn, the creases deep, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times before finally being placed where it was never supposed to fall. Paris watched her grandmother's face closely, sensing immediately that whatever was written there was not ordinary. "Grandma?" Paris asked softly. "What does it say?" Catherine didn't answer right away. She needed a moment, not to read, but to breathe. The handwriting on the page was unmistakable. Michael's handwriting had always been delicate, slightly slanted, careful. He wrote the way he spoke when he was vulnerable, slowly, thoughtfully, with intention. Catherine had seen the handwriting on hundreds of notes over the years, reminders, lyrics, prayers, messages left on the kitchen counter. But she had never seen it here, and she had never seen it begin this way. "For my little girl." Catherine's chest tightened. She looked at Paris, who was staring at her with wide, anxious eyes. There was no way to soften this moment, no way to delay it without doing harm. Catherine knelt down in front of her granddaughter. "It's from your father," she said quietly. Paris inhaled sharply. "He wrote it?" she whispered. Catherine nodded. The cemetery officials shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether they should remain or step away. This was no longer procedural. This was deeply personal. Catherine gave a small nod, and they discreetly stepped back, giving the family space. Paris took the note carefully, holding it as if it might disappear if she gripped it too tightly. Her fingers trembled. For a long moment, she just looked at it. "Did he know?" Paris asked suddenly. "Did he know what?" Catherine asked. "That I would come," Paris said. "Did he know I'd want to see him?" Catherine swallowed hard. "I don't know, sweetheart, but your father always knew you better than anyone." Paris unfolded the note. The handwriting was neat, but emotional. The kind of writing someone uses when they are trying to be clear, knowing there may not be another chance. Paris began to read silently at first, her eyes moving slowly across the page. Then she stopped, her lips parted slightly, her breath caught. "What?" Catherine asked gently. Paris looked up, tears already forming. It says he's sorry." Catherine's heart broke open all over again. Paris continued reading, this time out loud. Not because she was asked to, but because something in her needed the words to exist in the air. "My little girl, If you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to explain things the way I wanted to. I need you to know something before the world tries to tell you who I was." Paris's voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "I know I wasn't always strong. I know there were days you saw fear in me, and days you didn't understand why I was tired or sad. None of that was because of you. You were the best part of my life. You, your brothers, you saved me." Tears slid down Paris's cheeks, silent and unstoppable. Catherine closed her eyes. "I tried to protect you from a world that never protected me. Sometimes I did it the wrong way. Sometimes I hid too much. Sometimes I was afraid. But every choice I made was because I loved you more than anything I ever loved before." Paris's hands shook harder now. "I didn't know he felt like this," she whispered. Catherine reached out, resting a hand on her back. Paris, read on. "There will be people who tell you stories about me. Some will be kind. Some will be cruel. Some will pretend they knew me. But they did not know me the way you did when I tucked you in, when I held your hand, when I listened to you talk about your dreams." Paris wiped her eyes with her sleeve and continued. "Please don't let anyone make you feel ashamed of loving me. I was not perfect. I was human, but I loved you purely and completely. And if I could choose one thing to be remembered for, it would be being your father." At that, Paris broke. She folded the note to her chest and sobbed. Not the restrained tears she had learned to show in public, but the raw, uncontrollable crying of a child who had finally found proof that her father saw her. Catherine held her tightly, rocking her gently as Paris cried into her shoulder. "I miss him," Paris choked. "I miss him so much." "I know," Catherine whispered. "I know." After several minutes, Paris pulled back, her face red, eyes swollen, but something in her expression had shifted. The confusion she had carried since his death, the unanswered questions, had softened into something else, understanding. She unfolded the note again. "There's more," she said. She continued reading. "If you ever feel lost, remember this. You are stronger than you think, kinder than you realize, and you do not owe the world anything. Live your life for yourself, not for anyone else's expectations." Paris paused, then read the final lines. "I will always be with you, not in the noise, but in the quiet moments, when you feel brave for no reason, when music makes you feel safe, when you choose love even when it's hard. That's me. I love you forever." Daddy, the room was completely silent. Even the air felt different, heavier yet calmer. Paris folded the note carefully and held it close. "Can I keep it?" she asked softly. Catherine nodded immediately. "Of course. It's yours." Paris looked one last time at her father, then leaned forward and whispered something only he was meant to hear. "I'll be okay, Daddy," she said. "I promise." As the coffin was gently closed again, something fundamental had changed. Paris had not just said goodbye. She had received something rare, something most people never get, a final, private truth. And as they walked out of the mausoleum, Paris held the note tightly in her hand. Not as proof of death, but as proof of love. What no one there realized yet was that this note would shape the rest of her life. And one day, years later, when Paris would finally speak publicly about her father again, the words she would choose would echo the same message Michael had left behind. That behind the legend, there was a man who loved deeply, and that love never died with him. The car ride away from the cemetery was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar, not heavy, not suffocating. Quiet like a pause, the kind that comes after something important has been said. Paris sat in the back seat, the folded note resting safely inside her jacket pocket, her hand unconsciously pressed against it as if to make sure it was real. Prince stared out the window, jaw tight, replaying the scene in his mind over and over. BG sat silently, hugging his knees, processing everything in his own private way. Catherine watched him through the rear-view mirror. She had lived through decades of grief, but this felt different. Something had been unlocked. Something Michael had intentionally left behind had finally surfaced. And Catherine knew, with a certainty only a mother has, that the note was not the end of it. That night, back at the house, Paris couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the words of the letter repeating in her mind. Every sentence felt like a voice reaching across time. Not the public voice. Not the performer. Her father's real voice. Finally, she got up, careful not to wake anyone, and went to her room's small desk. She took the note out again and read it slowly, this time searching for what might be between the lines. That's when she noticed something she hadn't before. A faint indentation near the bottom of the page, almost invisible, as if something had been written underneath. Paris frowned, her heart beginning to race. She carefully lifted the page and held it under the desk lamp at an angle. The light caught the paper just right, and there it was, another message, not in ink, but pressed into the page. Her breath stopped. "Grandma," Paris whispered. Minutes later, Catherine stood beside her, glasses on, staring at the faint impressions. Michael's handwriting. Again. Catherine felt her knees weaken and sat down slowly. "He wrote more," Paris said. "Didn't he?" "Yes," Catherine said quietly. "He did." Together, they traced the indented words with their eyes, reading slowly, piecing them together. "There is something I never told you while I was alive because I didn't want it to become a burden." Paris swallowed hard. "The truth is, I was afraid of disappearing, not dying, but being misunderstood forever. I was afraid my children would grow up hearing stories about me that didn't sound like the man who tucked them in at night." Paris felt tears well again. "If the world ever tries to convince you that I was only a headline, only a rumor, only a tragedy, don't believe it." Catherine closed her eyes. "I stayed longer than I thought I could because of you. There were moments I didn't think I would survive, but then I'd hear your laughter and remember why I had to." Paris pressed her hand to her mouth. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know he felt that bad." Catherine nodded slowly. "Your father cared a lot quietly." Paris continued reading. "I want you to know this. None of what happened was your fault. Not my exhaustion. Not my sadness. Not the pain I carried from my childhood. I never wanted you to feel responsible for keeping me alive." Paris broke down again. "I always worried," she cried softly. "I always felt like I had to be strong for him." Catherine pulled her into a hug. "He knew. That's why he wrote this." They read the final lines together. "If you ever find this message, it means I trusted you with my truth. And my truth is simple. I loved you more than I fear the world. And that love was real." The room was silent when they finished. Paris wiped her face and took a shaky breath. "He wasn't just saying goodbye," she said. "He was trying to set me free." Catherine smiled sadly. "Yes, he was." The next morning, Prince noticed a change immediately. Paris wasn't distant. She wasn't withdrawn. She was calm. Not happy, but grounded. At breakfast, she finally spoke. "He left more," she said quietly. Prince froze. "More?" Paris nodded. "Not a letter. A truth." She told her brothers everything. The hidden message, the words pressed into the page, the things Michael had never said out loud. Prince listened intently, his expression tightening with every sentence. "So he knew," Prince said finally. "He knew how bad it was." "Yes," Paris said, "and he didn't want us to carry it." BG looked up. "Does that mean he's not hurting anymore?" Paris thought carefully before answering. "I think," she said, "it means he doesn't have to hide anymore." Later that day, Catherine made a decision she had been postponing for years. She opened a locked drawer in her bedroom, one that hadn't been touched since Michael's funeral. Inside were journals, cassette tapes, loose pages, things Michael had written late at night when the world was quiet, things he never intended for the public. Catherine brought them into the living room and set them on the table. Paris stared at them. "What are those?" Catherine met her eyes. "Your father's voice, in his own words." Prince frowned. "Why didn't you show us before?" "Because I wasn't sure you were ready," Catherine said honestly, "and because the world was too loud." She placed her hand on the stack. "But after what you found, I think your father wanted you to know who he really was. Not later, not through strangers, through truth." Paris nodded slowly. That night, as Paris lay in bed again, she held the note one last time before placing it safely in a box beside her bed. For the first time since her father's death, she didn't feel like she was chasing his memory. She felt like she was carrying it, gently, honestly, and somewhere in the quiet space between grief and understanding, something began to heal. But what Paris didn't yet realize was this. One of those journals contained a confession, one that would change how the world understood Michael Jackson forever. And when it finally came to light, it would force everyone to confront a truth they had ignored for decades. A truth Michael had hidden, not out of fear for himself, but out of love for his children. The box sat in the center of the living room, like a quiet witness. No one rushed to open it. Prince stood with his arms crossed, studying the worn leather journals as if they might speak on their own. BG hovered close to Catherine, his fingers curled into her sleeve. Paris sat on the floor, legs folded beneath her, eyes fixed on the familiar slanted handwriting visible on the top page. Michael's handwriting, not the polished signatures fans recognized, but the uneven, intimate script of someone writing for himself. Catherine broke the silence. "Your father didn't write these for the world," she said gently. "He wrote them so he wouldn't drown in his own thoughts." She picked up the first journal and held it carefully, as if it were fragile glass. "This one," she added, "is dated 2 years before he died." Paris's heart began to pound. Prince nodded slowly. "Read it," he said. "Please." Catherine hesitated only a moment before opening the journal. The first entry was dated late at night. "I smile all day, and no one notices how tired I am of being brave." Paris closed her eyes. It felt like hearing her father whisper in the dark. Catherine continued, "There is a difference between loneliness and solitude. Solitude is chosen. Loneliness is assigned." Prince swallowed hard. Michael's words didn't sound dramatic or theatrical. They sounded exhausted, honest, human. Catherine turned the page. "I worry my children will grow up believing I was fragile. I wasn't fragile. I was wounded, and wounds don't mean weakness. They mean survival." Paris felt something tighten in her chest. "He didn't want us to pity him," she said quietly. "No," Catherine replied. "He wanted you to understand him." The entries moved between reflections on his childhood, fears about the future, and moments of tenderness that caught them all off guard. Prince tries so hard to be responsible. "I see myself in him, and it scares me. I don't want him to feel he has to carry anyone." Prince's breath caught. He had never told anyone that pressure lived inside him. Yet somehow, his father had seen it. Paris feels everything deeply. I pray she never believes that sensitivity is a flaw. Paris wiped her eyes. BG still believes the world is gentle. I hope it stays that way longer than it did for me. The room was silent, except for the sound of pages turning. Then Catherine reached an entry marked with a faint star in the corner. She paused. "This one," she said softly. "I wasn't sure you should hear yet." Paris looked up. "Read it." Catherine nodded and began. "There are nights I think about disappearing, not because I want to die, but because I want the noise to stop. I want peace without explanation." BG leaned closer to Paris. "If anyone ever reads this, I need them to know my children were never the reason for my pain. They were the reason I stayed." Prince clenched his fists. "I stayed longer than my body wanted to because their futures mattered more than my comfort." Paris felt her breath shake. The next line was written darker, as if pressed harder into page. "But I also need to admit something I never said out loud." Catherine's voice faltered. She took a breath and continued. "I was afraid my life would end before I could tell the truth. That I didn't need to be perfect anymore. That I was tired of being extraordinary, when all I wanted was to be enough." Paris stared at the page. "He thought he had to earn love," she whispered. Prince nodded, even from himself. Catherine closed the journal slowly. "There's more," she said, "but not all of it needs to be shared right now." Paris stood up. "What's the part he was afraid of telling?" she asked. Catherine met her eyes. "That he was human," she said simply, "and that the world didn't always allow him to be." Later that evening, Paris sat alone in her room, the journal resting on her lap. She reread one final entry, one Catherine had skipped. "If my children ever wonder why I didn't say everything while I was alive, it's because I didn't want my pain to become their inheritance." Paris pressed her forehead to the page. "I understand now," she whispered. She wasn't meant to fix her father. She was meant to live. The next day, word reached the family that someone at the cemetery had spoken. A worker, a rumor. Questions were starting to form. Prince paced the kitchen. "If this gets out—" "We don't owe anyone explanations," Catherine said firmly. "But the note," Paris said, "the journals, they're not secrets anymore. They're truths." Catherine nodded. Truth doesn't demand a stage. It survives without one. That afternoon, Paris made a quiet decision. She wrote a letter of her own, not for the public, not for the media, but for her father. She folded it carefully and placed it inside the same box that held Michael's note. "I see you now," she whispered as she closed the lid. "All of you." What none of them knew was that one specific journal, the one marked with a red ribbon, contained a single confession Michael had never shared with anyone. A confession not about fame, not about pain, but about a moment that changed the course of his life forever. And when Paris finally read it, it would force her to make a choice. Protect her father's truth, or let the world finally hear it. And that choice would come sooner than she was ready for. The atmosphere in the house had shifted since Paris found Michael's journals. It wasn't just the somber mood or the weight of the secrets they had uncovered. It was a sense of closeness that seemed to be binding them all, even in their grief. Michael's words were no longer something to be hidden away in the shadows. Instead, they were a key to understanding him, to understanding his truth. Paris sat alone in her room, the journal resting open before her. The pages had already revealed so much, but this red ribbon that marked one particular entry felt different. She couldn't shake the feeling that it held something her father had never wanted anyone to know, something that might change everything. She had read through the journals over the last few days, but this entry, the last one that Michael had written before his death, was unlike the rest. It wasn't filled with reflective thoughts or apologies. It wasn't about his children or his fears. It was something far more personal, far more intimate. Paris hesitated, her finger tracing the red ribbon before she untied it. She felt her heart race as she slowly turned the page, not knowing exactly what she would find. But as she read the first few lines, she realized it wasn't just an ordinary entry. It was a confession. "There is a truth I've never shared with anyone, not even Catherine. It's not about my fame or my struggles or my childhood. It's about the choices I made, the choices that brought me here. And the one choice I regret the most, the one that will haunt me forever, is that I let myself be consumed by this need to be something more than human. I wanted to be perfect so badly that I forgot how to simply live." Paris closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the weight of his words. She could feel the pain radiating from the pages, the years of pressure that Michael had endured. She could hear his voice in her mind, as if he were speaking directly to her. And in those words, she found a piece of him she had never fully understood. The next lines made her stomach churn. "There was a time when I thought that if I could just give the world everything it wanted, if I could be everything they thought I should be, then I would finally be loved. But I've learned the hard way that love isn't something you can earn with perfection. It's something you have to give freely, without strings attached. And that's what I failed to do." Paris could feel her chest tighten as the realization hit her. Michael had always been searching for validation, trying to prove to the world that he was worthy of love. But in doing so, he had forgotten how to love himself. "The one person I never allowed to see me, truly see me, was myself. And now I'm paying the price. But more than that, I passed that pain on to the people I love the most. To Catherine, to my children. And that is the worst part. That's the part one will never forgive myself for." Paris couldn't hold back the tears any longer. She reached for the tissue on her bedside table, wiping her face as she let the words sink in. This was a father she never fully knew, the one who carried so much guilt, so much pain, and yet never spoke of it. And then came the final confession. "There's one last thing I need to say. It's not something I can take back, but I need to be honest about it. I've made mistakes with my children. I've let them think I could shield them from the world. I thought that if I could keep them safe, keep them hidden from the pain I felt, then I would be doing right by them. But now I see that I've only trapped them in a different kind of prison. They deserve to live without the weight of my mistakes. They deserve to be free. Paris's hands shook as she closed the journal, her mind racing. She had never seen her father in this light before. Vulnerable, remorseful, and raw. Michael had always been the image of strength, of invincibility. But here, in these words, he was simply a man who had been broken by the weight of his own life. The door creaked open, and Catherine stepped into the room, her expression soft but knowing. She had been watching Paris from the doorway for a moment, letting her daughter process what she had read. Catherine had already known about the journal. She had seen the notes, the scribbled lines, and the raw emotion, but she knew that Paris needed to see it for herself. "Paris, sweetheart," Catherine said gently, walking over to sit beside her. "What did you find?" Paris turned to her mother, her eyes red from the tears. "I don't know what to say, Mom. I thought I knew him, but this is a side of him I never saw." Catherine nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sorrow and understanding. "I know. He never wanted you to know how much he struggled. He wanted to protect you, but in doing so, he kept you from knowing the truth. But Michael was human. He was a father who loved you more than anything in the world, but he also carried burdens that were too heavy for him to bear alone." Paris swallowed hard. "Why didn't he tell me?" Catherine sighed, reaching out to take Paris's hand. "He was afraid that you would see him differently, afraid that you wouldn't understand. But the truth is, Paris, he never wanted to be perfect. He just wanted to be loved, just like everyone else." The room fell silent, both mother and daughter grappling with the enormity of what had just been revealed. Michael Jackson, the icon, the legend, was not the untouchable figure they had all thought him to be. He was, in the end, just a man who had loved deeply, who had tried to shield his children from the pain of the world, and who had paid a heavy price for it. Paris looked down at the journal, her fingers tracing the edges of the page. "I understand now," she whispered. "He wasn't perfect, and that's okay." Catherine smiled softly. "Yes, sweetheart, he was never meant to be perfect. And now, it's up to you to live in the truth of who he was, and who you are. Your father left you a legacy of love and pain, but also a chance to heal." Paris nodded, feeling a sense of clarity she hadn't felt before. The weight of the past was still heavy, but it no longer felt like something she had to carry alone. She knew that this was only the beginning of understanding Michael Jackson, but it was a beginning she was ready to face. And with that, Paris closed the journal, knowing that her journey toward healing, toward acceptance, had only just begun.